tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddham dhammam sangham namasami.
So welcome everyone. I've been kind of leading a series on Sanya perception suttas and over the last 3 weeks, and Ayya Suvijjānā is now back out of retreat. So because she was in retreat when the sutta was picked, I've still kind of organized it for this week, but hopefully you will also offer some guidance around it, and then you get Ayya Suvijjānā for the next few weeks. So welcome, and welcome John joining us. So I'm going to do a share screen, give a little review of the topics we've covered, and then go into today's sutta. Organize the screen. Okay. So I think some of you were here 3 weeks ago when I started this series, and I said that week we'd do kind of a shallow dive down the pool of Sanya, and that we'd go deeper. Well, I kind of feel like 4 weeks into it, and we're still just maybe we've got to the stage of snorkeling. So I think this topic could be before we get to the deep dive, many years. But this is just a 4-week series, and just probably start something different.
So it's Nibbana?
So the series was all about exploring perception. And the first week we started with the Nibbāna Sutta.
That sounds pretty deep to me.
Well, start with the goal in mind.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And the main takeaway from that, and I put the links to the videos from that week. The main takeaway from that was that we were trying to understand where perceptions led through our training. And it was that we should look at perceptions to see which ones cause us to decline, where we stay stable, where there's distinction, and where there's the deep depth, the penetration. Week 2, we really looked mostly at the papancha, that was our vocab, proliferations. So how our perceptions lead into proliferations, and that whole chain that perceptions end up going all the way from into having name and form, contact, all the way down to quarrels and disputes. And I didn't list all of the suttas we looked at. You could go back to the notes on those. Week 3, we looked mostly at the distortions of our perceptions. And the word, the vipallasa, like throwing us completely upside down, how we wander through the world with our perceptions upside down. And so now we're in week 4, and I'm summarizing it as there's no me here or there or in between. So we'll go into the sutta. And at the bottom of this, I've got the resources that can point you back to Sutta Central and the other things. So like I did in week 1, I kind of gave you a collection of ways you could look at the suttas and the ways that you could study the Pali. And so you'll get a little bit more of the toolkit this week, the next level down, now that we got our snorkel masks on. Okay. Is there anything you want to say about the sutta before we start, or?
Oh, it's actually pretty famous amongst the monastics and that I know, because I've heard quite a few monastics as a favorite sutta, and sometimes it's misunderstood what the meaning is, because it's quite deep with the teaching it's given, and so it's not to be taken lightly. And I think we'll get, and you'll get, I think, Niyyānika will be getting into.
Yeah.
Actually, what really sparked the ability to get into the depth of this teaching so quickly. It's not, but it's been pondered and discussed. This particular sutta is one of the suttas that's discussed.
Very often.
It's an important sutta.
And I had wanted to go into the deeper dive, and then I realized, whoa, we haven't even covered like the shallow part of this one, which is not that shallow. So know that literally there are like a series of scholarly sermons written on this that we'll only like point at today. So let's go into the background. And what I've done is pieced things from the translations in Sutta Central to give you the overview of the backstory. So here's the summary. The Buddha was staying near Savatthi in Jeta's Grove, Anathapindika's monastery. Bāhiya of the bark cloth was residing by Suparaka on the ocean shore. And the reason that Bāhiya was wearing bark cloth is because he'd actually been a sailor that was blown, his ship was destroyed, and his clothes were ripped off as he was being sent to shore. And when he got there, he clothed himself using bark, and he kind of became a practitioner at that point, although not a Buddhist practitioner.
This was in the Vinaya,
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, and then the story was that he did cover himself, and then the people thought he was a naked ascetic and started giving him alms. But then he had according to I don't know if it's commentarial or actually in the Vinaya, he had been an ascetic in a previous life, so that kind of sparked his desire to return to that. And then as the story develops, there's another character that was practicing with him, but they all died attempting to gain arahantship. And that's a whole other story, so we don't have to
Yeah, I totally feel like we could do a whole series on this, but
yeah,
not today.
Yeah, this
Okay.
is one of those.
Oh, here comes the character. So Bāhiya thought he was an arahant and a deva, and the deva was one of those who were from his previous.
He passed away too, attempting, but he gained a higher
birth.
Yeah.
And so the deva said to Bāhiya, Bāhiya, you're not a perfected one, nor are you on the path to perfection. You don't have the practice by which you might become a perfected one or one on the path to perfection. So imagine Bāhiya's kind of shock at this. But because he was actually an earnest practitioner, he wasn't in it for the alms food or the robes or things or his bark cloth. He was really cared about liberation. And so Bāhiya replied, then who exactly are those in the world who are perfected or on the path to perfection? And the deva named the Buddha and where he could be found. And so Bāhiya left right away and traveled to find the Buddha. And we were talking about it yesterday, so I pulled up on Google Maps. And I don't know if you can see, if I zoom in, it says it would take 332 hours to walk from roughly where he was to where the Buddha was.
So this is another thing that's I think it's in the commentaries, but the way it's translated by other people is that it was he didn't. It says he didn't stop for a night, but there was an understanding from the Pali translation that it was one night's travel.
Right.
So it was a one day and night's travel. So it was like an impossible journey. So some people were speculating that he had some kind of psychic powers that he was able to do this. So you'll hear this discussion, but Bhante Sujato says not stopping for more than a night.
That makes sense.
So
Yeah.
whether he was had some kind of psychic abilities already, and that's why he overestimated his,
Oh, yeah,
attainment, it
yeah.
could have been, or he was just in such a state of urgency that he didn't pause for more than a night. He just kept charging through. And usually a journey like that, you would travel in stages and
Rest up and then go another stage, rest up.
and
Yeah.
this is another thing to consider when you read in the suttas, people walking to see the Buddha. This is really a form of dedication to go this distance.
Oh, yeah.
Or even if they're the outskirts of town, it might take several hours to walk.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Even if, he's in, Sawati and not, in the Jeta's Grove, it might have taken some hours to get there,
Yeah,
not knowing whether you'd see the Buddha or not.
right.
So so we're very fortunate.
We're very
We're not
fortunate.
comparing ourselves to the Buddha or anything, but it's easy to access the teaching.
We're just a zoom away.
Yeah,
We're
so
Sutta Central away.
yeah.
Okay, so Bāhiya does get there after either short or long travel, and he wants to see the Buddha, and he's told that the Buddha's out on alms round. And so then Bāhiya rushed out of the Jadis Grove and entered Savatthi, where he saw the Buddha walking for alms. He was impressive and inspiring, with peaceful faculties and mind attained to the highest self-control and serenity, like an elephant with tamed, guarded, and controlled faculties. Bāhiya went up to the Buddha. Oh, let's stop there for a moment. So sometimes in later suttas, you'll see, the marks of a great man and, his ears and his, how tall he is and all of this. But here, what is it that's inspiring Bāhiya is that he's peaceful, he's serene, he's got a sense of stability about him. So Bāhiya went up to the Buddha, bowed with his head at the Buddha's feet, and said, "Sir, let the Blessed One teach me the Dhamma. Let the Holy One teach me the Dhamma. That would be for my lasting welfare and happiness." And the Buddha said, "It's not time, Bāhiya, so long as I have entered an inhabited area for alms food." And this repeats as often as the pattern. He asks again, "No, please, please." And the Buddha says, "It's not time, please, please." And so on the third time, the Buddha gives him a brief teaching. And I've got a couple of translations here. We'll start with Bhante Sudaso, and then some other materials that we'll bring in that are for your further exploration and study on your own.
But wait a minute.
Oh, yes, please.
I think,
Scroll back.
yeah, he's asking for a brief teaching. He asks 3 times, and he says, the Buddha is saying, no, this is not an appropriate time. And there is a sense of urgency
That's
that
right.
Bāhiya has traveled all this way, and the Buddha is saying, this isn't the appropriate time. And Bāhiya says, well, neither of us know when we might die, or I don't know when I might die or that you may die.
Thank you so much for bringing that
He
in.
was so compelled to hear the teaching. I think that's one of the translations of he was compelled to take this journey to find the Buddha, and then he finds him. He's just so in awe of this beautiful presence of this being. He knew he found an arahant just by how his deportment, and when this is another thing, when you meet somebody, there's something different about them.
Mm-hmm.
And then you feel like you can trust what they're saying. And so I think his heart was wide open when he approached the Buddha, and he's very receptive. So I think this is a essential thing to note, that he could understand what the Buddha said.
Yes.
Because he asked 3 times, and then he finally said, well, neither of us know I think how did he say it? He said,
I might
I have it here.
Okay, good, good.
But
Yeah.
you never know, sir, when life is at risk, either the Buddha or my own. So that means let the Blessed One teach me the Dhamma. Let the Holy One teach me the Dhamma. It would be for my lasting welfare and happiness. So he's pleading, please. I don't know if I will survive long enough to hear
Right.
the teaching, or you may die. So yeah,
Foreshadowing.
you'll see. Most people know this story.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
But that attitude and what we've talked about in previous weeks about the vipalasas, the underlying tendencies, those weren't completely worn away yet in Bāhiya, or he would have been an arahant. Yet I think that his hindrances were pretty in abeyance at this point at which he's going to be listening to this teaching. Ajahn Brahmali talks about, how we have these suttas and this many were enlightened and this on hearing it. And his explanation is that they'd really had practiced to a point where they were listening to the sutta with the hindrances not present at the time of listening. And so they were really ready for the Dhamma to just drop in and wisdom to occur.
And there's also the chanda of the Dhamma chanda instead of Kama chanda, where he had the desire for the Dhamma, to hear the teaching rather than sense desire. So this is his only, and that's actually, instead of an impediment, that it's helpful if you have that. This one of the wholesome
faculties, yeah.
Wholesome desires.
Wholesome
Chanda.
desires.
Chanda is can be either wholesome or unwholesome. So this is a wholesome desire.
A happy desire. All right, so here we are with the teaching in brief. Teach me the Dhamma, Bhante, Blessed One. Teach me the Dhamma, Sublime One, for the sake of my long-term benefit and happiness. And this is the Buddha's reply. Therefore, Bāhiya, this is how you are to train yourself. In the seen, there will be just the seen. In the heard, there will be just the heard. In the sensed, there will be just the sensed. In the cognized, there will be just the cognized. This Bāhiya is how you are to train yourself. Bāhiya, when it is like this for you, in the seen, there is just the seen. In the heard, there is just the heard. In the sensed, there is just the sensed. In the cognized, there is just the cognized. Then, Bāhiya, there will be no you in terms of this. When there is no you in terms of this, then there is no you there. When there is no you there is no you here, or beyond, or in between. Just this is the end of suffering.
Sounds easy.
Well, for Bāhiya at this point, it was. But for us, we're going to delve deeper. So then, while the Blessed One was teaching this brief Dhamma teaching to Bāhiya, Bāhiya's mind was liberated from the corruptions by means of non-attachment. And this is the...
Great, you've got the Pali there.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. And so this is that nugget that we want to look at more today, Bhikkhu Sujato's translation. You won't be by that. Tato tvang Bāhiya natena. So he's speaking to Bāhiya, natena, by that. And we'll look at the digital Pali dictionary in just a moment.
We could probably talk about the sense bases too. He's talking about
Absolutely.
all the sense bases, not just hearing.
Oh, yeah. Let's go back up to that. Why don't you
there
comment on that?
Yeah, because there's the seen and the
Here.
heard and the sensed. And the sensed takes also
Here.
the odors,
Yeah.
smell and
So
touch
that's-
and taste.
So
It's a mutta.
Yeah, so
mutta.
dita, you've probably seen that one before. This
Seeing.
Seeing, sutta, hearing, and here, this one, mutte. There you go. Go ahead.
Mutte, sensed, perceived. It can be thought. Bhante Sujato says the thought, but I don't, I think it's the taste, smelled and touched, all the three senses, as well as there's cognition there too,
And that's
which
the
would cover the
Niyyānika.
thinking.
Yeah.
So I think this is talking about all the sense spaces as well as cognition.
And that we stay with the base of what's sensed rather than papanchizing, which we talked about a couple weeks back. The papancha is, I think everyone here knows that word, the proliferation, where the mind goes around and around and around.
And you don't have to get into conflict with papancha. It's more of a distraction and a misperception of what's like I mean, I can just see there's a clock here and the time. So, I mean, there's perception, but it can just stay instead of
Oh,
getting
we've got
into
this much time left. Oh, should we, really hurry or
whatever.
oh.
Yeah, so but the defilement arises, it corrupts it. It's probably this is the most important thing to look for rather than just being even just distracted. And distraction is delusion.
Yeah.
But when I see the clock, I just see a shape but then I can just see it, but then I have to perceive it to have some kind of cognitive awareness. And then so I just take the data that's important rather than, oh, look at that cute little clock. I really want that clock.
And
Can I get another
just
one?
reset the time, daylight savings time. Yeah, thank you those in Europe for making it on our time zone. Or I guess you're not Europe anymore, are you? UK.
So, but the me and mine, and is that my clock? Or I would like to have that for me, or I would never have a clock like that. That's such a cheap looking clock.
Oh. See, now I'm proliferating.
And so then if your identity is around your possessions.
I picked that clock out.
Bad choice. I would never have. So this is where the I
and the quarrels and disputes
come into that. So I won't be by that. How would we by that?
Let's go down to the Pali. Here we are.
Yeah. Ta.
So Tena is this one.
So this is my identity with the clock, is by that, with that.
Yeah, on account of this clock and the fact that I just carefully reset it to the proper time, and I, because of that, I am the one that is so on top of things on time. And then tata is in regard to that, regarding that matter, Suvijjānā is so aloof. So even when it's an I perception, I can be projecting the I on somebody else by my perceiving and making being with continued existence, not holding the vipalasas, Ayyā Suvijjānā. Working on it. Okay, so I also did want to do like I did in the first week, bring in some other resources so that for your own studies, you know what's out there to dive deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper, all the way to liberation.
Hours of work.
Hours, days, lifetimes.
Yeah, but this is really great that you put together. Thank you.
So the deeper dive I would recommend, we'll have a little snippet from it, is the Nibbana sermons 14, 15, and 16, which go much deeper into the Bāhiyasutta and some others that are around that same theme. But Venerable Anālya also pointed us in that class to his book on compassion and emptiness, which had a brief section on Bāhiya in it. So I just put a little bit of that in here that's relevant before you get into the deep dive. he gives a sense of understanding and meaning that often we pick up wrongly.
Okay, great, thank you.
That's
Thank
so
you.
that we don't go there.
Okay.
All right, so I'm going to read it. The main implication of this instruction seems to be that one should remain aware of bare existence and limit one's mental processing to just that bare act of cognizing. Through such staying present with awareness of experience, the proliferations that usually arise can be avoided. One should just be aware of seeing forms without all the mental chatter that such seeing normally arouses. In the same way, one should just remain aware in relation to the other senses. And I'll just say that I've even heard this in retreats from some teachers where they're saying, oh, you just notice colors and shapes and whatnot. But that's almost like a mindlessness. It's not being mindful.
It's not wisdom.
Yeah, say more.
Yeah. This is what happened to me when I was a Zen student. Was just aware of, moment by moment, the sense contact, which I was trained to do. And then I said, well, then what? And the teacher said, that's it. And I went, that's it? That's all? I can't be, because I got to a point where it was just sound, just color, just this, that. And it was like, because there was no wisdom with that, I didn't have a further teaching until I started looking at the suttas, how to work with that. It was like, so yeah, unfortunately, that Zen teacher didn't know any further than that.
Yeah, and that doesn't mean that all Zen teachers don't.
That particular one didn't. Maybe I could have gone somewhere else and found teachers. Oh, get deeper into it, or see the impermanence, or something.
But this happens with Theravada teachers too.
Yeah,
I've experienced it where they're like, and it's kind of the zombie walk when you're on retreat, and you're just kind of like, for me, my mouth just hangs open, and I just kind of looking around, and that's not enlightening. It's kind of dully pleasant, but it's not enlightening. The mental chatter isn't there, but neither is the brightness and the happiness and the clear seeing. I mean, if you notice a Dhamma teacher who's not got the hindrances stirred up in there, somebody gives them a question and you're like, the teacher just switches gears so quickly and they're able to respond, and it's fluid and it's bright. It's not that there's not thinking and perceiving and then thinking, but it's not a proliferation of chat. I love this one, without the mental chatter. Okay, so I'm not going to read this section, but it's basically what we just said, that often the injunction is taken that it's just remaining aware of the sense doors, which is true to an extent. But what we really want to get down to is why. The main point is simply that one does not take a stance on anything at all. It's not that you don't perceive and identify. It's that you don't then put me and mine into it. You don't take a stance on the clock. It's probably too flimsy to stand on anyway. Should we show him the clock? Yeah, it's just
the stand came apart.
It's an itty bitty plastic thing.
This is
it's perfect.
It's a wonderful clock. You see,
This is
you can either.
It's nice to have Ayya Suvijjānā at a retreat.
Okay, I can't seem to get it to stand up with this thing
here. I'll reassemble.
Assembly required.
And so, and this harkens back to when we were looking at where perceptions led all the way to quarrels. It went through the name and form. So it says, without allowing name and form to thrive into elaborations. It's not that there's not name and form. It's that we don't stir it up into these elaborations of defilements, the vipalasas. and one does not react to or identify with any aspect of experience. So that sentence is kind of like key takeaway. Okay. So the other source I mentioned was the Nibbana sermons, and I put links to these resources within this document. And I love the way he plays on words. This is a Sinhala Bhikkhu scholar. Imaginings, I, or me thinkings, by way of craving, conceit, and views, they lead to an identification. And he uses the term tammayata. And here's from the Digital Poly Dictionary, which is the principles of identification with. And that's basically our cultural wiring, is to immediately have this spark of me as I interact with the world.
It's pretty universal. It's even animals.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just like my turf. I was watching the
Oh, yeah.
squirrel, and I had scattered some little bit of bits of nuts and some rice and out, and the birds started picking at it, and the squirrel got on the tree and was running around the broad trunked fir tree, running around and scared all the birds away.
Mine, 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 mine.
This is mine. This is my turf. This is my food. There was more there than the squirrel needed, but the squirrel had to chase away the birds. So I think, you see, this is primitive, actually. It's not, this is some kind of, us humans, we're creating this me and mine.
Mhm.
I think it's even in an animal level, mammals at least.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And that squirrel was not steady. I mean, it was shaking all over, you know, as part of its little dance to scare the birds off. So from the sermon, it says, such an identification makes one unsteady. For when the thing identified with is shaken, one also gets shaken up.
So the squirrel's shaking up because they're on my turf. Okay, so yeah, so and if anything changes that or like what we think is ours and it's broken or it's gone or it's turns out to be other than we think it should be, then
Set to the wrong time. Yep. This was another, the last two lines we used within this Sanya study too. For whatever it thinks it is, for whatever it thinks it is, I think that should be, I think it is. For whatever one thinks it is, it turns out to be something else. So this is just a phrase to take throughout the day. I use, it might be so. You know, it's like I take everything as a hypothesis. It might be so. It might be so. But you could use the Pali or the English. Well, even whatever I think, it could turn out to be something else. And actually, it is something else because our perceptions are conditioned and the responses are fabricated. And then one more thing from the Nibbana sermons. The forms of imagining or me thinking, the Buddha compared to an extremely subtle bondage of Mara. I don't remember if we've done this sutta, I think so, where, is it Vipachita?
Vipachita,
The-
Vipachita, the
Surya?
Assyria,
Mhm.
the leader of the Assyrias.
Yeah, he's in bond.
Vipachiti.
Vipachiti, that's
Yeah,
it. Thank you.
Vipachiti. Yeah, he's there are the Asuras and the Devas or the Tawatingsa Devas are always kind of battling one another, and no one ever gets really hurt or. But what are you going to say? He's bound
Well,
by
he's
his.
bound basically by his perceptions. You know, when he's thinking, oh, the Asuryas are so great and we should just stomp on these devas, and then the bondage holds him.
Well, he's been captured.
He's been captured.
So then he's bound by his
Five
neck
cords.
and his limbs. Yes.
Mhm.
So he's bound, and he's in the Sadama hall. And every time the Saka passes by, he starts to insult him and stuff like that. But then when he starts to think that the Devas are virtuous,
Virtuous, yeah.
then he's freed from
Mhm.
his bonds. And then whenever he thinks that they're not, and that the asuras are virtuous, then he's bound again.
Mhm.
There's but it's like this is like someone thought it was like the five khandas. You're bound
Mhm.
by them. They say thinking that this is our self. This is me. This is mine. This
Right.
is myself. And then we're bound by these
Mhm.
five khandas, and then we're released when we don't cling to a self
Yeah.
in regards to these five khandas.
And so if you go to the Nibbana sermon on this, it will dive.
Does he talk about it?
Yeah, he does.
Uh-huh.
Much deeper.
Uh-huh.
That's where the whole ... in there
That's
is
so-
probably.
Subtle bondage of Mara. The bondage of Mara is even more subtle. I think that's what it is than the bondage of Vipachitti.
Yeah. Yeah.
His bondage.
So this is not like an easy thing we're looking at here. We're not messing around with piddly little things. We're talking about
The conceit of I am.
the conceit of I am.
That's and I think that's what they're referring to whenever you think of it is.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just everything in the world, it's our conceit and and how our conceit infiltrates everything, even like the silly clock. He's just like, okay.
Okay, so I think we saw that Bāhiya, got it. He was prepped from that long walk, from his previous practice. He was wide open and he got it immediately. The good news is if that's not us in this moment right now,
that is how you should train.
that is how you should train.
Yeah.
And Bāhiya was lucky, conditioned to be ready for that moment. But the Buddha gave this same teaching to others, and another monastic at the time, Malunkyaputta, so the son of Malunkya. And I'd love to do a series just on this particular monastic at some point, because the Buddha actually, he appears in multiple suttas where the Buddha is like, oh, come on, old man. He came to monastic life later. This is where you're off. This is, so he gets chastised by the Buddha several times where he's just not getting it. And Malunkyaputta went to the Buddha to ask for a teaching, and he gave him exactly the teaching that he gave to Bāhiya. And this particular monastic then says, oh, I think I understand. And he's not understanding at that ultimate level of release yet, but he's at least got a clear sense of what he can go practice with. So he responds to the Buddha, this is what I think I heard. And I'll give it first in just like they often do, the negation form, and then I'll give Bhante Anālayo's positive version, which comes from the Chinese parallels. So the Bāhiyasutta does not actually have a parallel in the other traditions, but it is still considered a gem in the suttas, as I mentioned earlier. And one of the things, because of the Dhamma, the depth of the Dhamma, but one of the things that also lends it more validity, veracity, is that this teaching appears in other suttas, and it is the other suttas are widely noted across the traditions. So this is pretty clearly a teaching coming from the Buddha. So this is how this particular monastic says he understood what was going to be done. Can I say something first, or?
Oh, I just love this sutta.
Okay.
I love the whole of it too.
Oh, I know.
He does ask for a teaching in brief, and the Buddha says, "Oh, what can I say to you, old man?" Yeah, and then after chastising him, he gives him teaching anyway.
And the good news is that this monastic then did go and practice and did reach arahantship.
Yeah, it's a beautiful sutta. I've shared it online before. So.
Oh, I'm gonna have to. I looked up some of your previous ones on Sanya when I was preparing for this.
Yeah.
I'll have to find that one. All right, we can put that on the resource list if we find it quickly. All right, so he says, having seen a form and forgotten mindfulness, applying the mind to an object held dear, one feels it with an excited mind and persists in indulging in it. So for them, increase various feelings that originate with form. And by covetousness and by violence is their mind destroyed. For one heaping up suffering like this, Nibbana is said to be far away.
So for the translation also, muddled mindfulness was I think of Bhante Bodhi's, the way he talks about having seen a form with muddled mindfulness. So
Teacher Nanda and I were just talking about muddle-mindedness.
So we're not using our sense restraint. We're not being mindful.
Mm.
So this is the opposite of what the Buddha was talking about, the seen, only the seen.
Okay.
So then they have lust for the form or desire for the form.
And it goes through, in the sutta, it doesn't just do form, it actually goes through all of the senses. As, so that it's, I just put in the tidbit here for our time period. And here's the agama parallel, the positive side. If on seeing, I should just double check that agama is the same basically as sutta. It's in the Chinese traditions.
The Chinese parallel.
Chinese parallels with it. So it's not the Theravada canon. It's a canon, one of the other Buddhist schools.
It's not a Pali canon, but it's a Chinese.
Thank you. Yeah, that's I said that wrongly. Listen to Suvijjānā.
It's been carried into China and translated into Chinese and reconfigured. It's not, you won't find Majjhima Nikaya such and such exactly, like it's not, they have to, what they do is they pair it up, it may be even in a different collection, a different Nikaya.
Yes, and Sutta Central is a good tool to find those parallels.
Yeah. And then if you know Chinese characters, you'll have a great resource.
Big advantage,
Because not all of it is, Bhante and Nalio and others have been translating these, but there's so much that hasn't been yet. And not available. So we're just fortunate for what they've selected and translated so far.
And this is one of those selections. If on seeing a form, one does not grasp its characteristics, and the mind conforms to right mindfulness. So it's not that one doesn't see the characteristics, it's that one doesn't grasp, mimic with them. The mind conforms to right mindfulness. Then craving will not taint the mind with what is detrimental. And the bondage of attachment will also not arise, not giving rise to cravings for the countless forms that manifest. Thoughts of lustful, sensual desire, ill will, and harm will be unable to afflict the mind.
Would you read that once again? Read it again.
The full thing? Sure.
Yeah.
I know, it's so wonderful. If on seeing a form, one does not grasp its characteristics, and the mind conforms to right mindfulness, then craving will not taint the mind with what is detrimental, and the bondage of attachment will also not arise, not giving rise to cravings for the countless forms that manifest. Thoughts of lustful, sensual desire, ill will, and harm will be unable to afflict the mind.
This is exactly what the Buddha was talking about. It's so beautiful. I like that about the form about mindfulness conforms. Mind conforms
Conforms.
to right mindfulness.
Mhm.
This is so beautiful.
Mm.
Rather than conforming to this is mine.
No, it's mine. The clock we're fighting over is actually a donation to Pasadi Vihara. It's neither one of ours. This is all play acting.
Just to make that clear.
Just to make that clear. And we appreciate the donor of the clock. Bhikkhu Sujato, I just also took the 2 lines from his version in the Nikayas.
Continuing with Malunkyā Putta.
Yeah, eroding suffering like this, you're said to be in the presence of extinguishment. That to me was also very beautiful.
So instead of piling up suffering, the other one is piling up suffering or accumulating suffering and then being further from Nibbana. This is eroding away. So this is why that we see it as a training. You know, we're not Bāhiya. We haven't already given everything up, and
we've got these vipalasas.
We're not clad in bark and given up everything, and like traveled miles. It's in the presence of the Buddha. Can you imagine? I mean, your heart would be completely wide open if you saw the Buddha. I think if you were sensitive. Not everybody who saw the Buddha could really see
the
what,
Buddha.
perceive what was in front of them when the Buddha was there. But Bāhiya was able to do that, and his heart was open. So for the rest of us,
we have some vipalasas.
we have training. We have this training.
And we have the training to work with the vipalasas.
And so the role of mindfulness was brought up by Malunkyā Putta. He understood that was part of it, and sense restraint, and so it's a gradual path. So not everybody's going to have instantaneous
but there's
awakening. But
there is a path of training.
Yes, this is a path of training, definitely. Okay. So perversions, vipalasas.
Yeah, and then we'll get to the conclusion of the sutta and open it up.
Okay.
So this is hearkening back to when we were talking about vipalasas, the distortions or perversions. 3 kinds of perversions known as sanya vipalasas, chittas vipalasa, and ditthi vipalasa. So perceptions, mental, mind, heart, thought, and views.
You could say distorted.
Distorted. Yeah, distortion.
Perversion or distorted. I like distorted.
Yeah.
For vipalasa.
Yeah, this one's translated by the Sinhala one. So the languaging does feel a little bit.
I mean, it's another way of.
Yeah. But what does it give rise to? It gives rise to a mass of concepts of an imaginary nature. The entire mass of suffering summed up by the terms birth, decay, death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair are basically of a mental origin. So we got to clean this mind up. All right, so we'll do the ending of the sutta. This is Bhikkhu Ananda Jyoti's translation. Yeah. And we'll probably stop there.
Okay.
Let the gracious one preach the Dhamma. Okay, wait, this is the sutta still. That's a repeat. Here, Bhante Sudaso. Bāhiya has attained final Nibbana. Then the Blessed One, having understood this matter, made this proclamation.
Well, we skipped a whole.
Oh.
You skipped it. You skipped a section of it.
I did skip it.
So Bāhiya got it.
You're going to have to tell the story. Oh.
It's here. Shouldn't it be here?
Yeah. The only part I've got is this one.
But anyway, so he hears the teaching, then through the gracious one's brief teaching of this Dhamma, Bāhiya of the bark robe's mind was immediately freed from the pollutants, the asavas, without attachment. Sadhu. Then the gracious one, having advised the Bāhiya of the bark robe with the brief advice, went away. But also he had been told that he needed to, he wanted to go forth. I think
That's in the
another thing.
Vinaya section. Can you?
Okay, so he
briefly?
wanted to go forth, and the Buddha says, well, you have to be appropriately robed.
And have a
So you
bowl.
need a robe and bowl.
Mhm.
So he went out in search of the robe and bowl immediately. And then it's said that he was killed by a young cow. And it may have been a cow with a calf, is what one translation I heard.
And I've also heard that it may have been a cow possessed by a demon who was his nemesis in a past life.
So the
So-
cattle would be roaming. I don't know if you've ever hiked through cattle field, but they
have.
really are possessive of their
Yeah.
territory too.
Yeah.
So a cow and calf may have, with a calf may have gored Ayyā, and he died. And then after the Blessed One instructed him, that's what it says there.
Mhm.
Anyway,
And so they did take, after alms round, they saw the body next to the road. And he instructed the bhikkhus to pick up the body and
cremated.
cremate it, and then not bury it.
Make a stupa.
Make a stupa, like
Yeah.
carrion, something, yeah. To venerate. And so they wanted to know, well, what happened to Bāhiya? And that's when he said, well, he's enlightened, he's an arahant. And they realized there was no happened to, no next life. And in the rejoicing, the Buddha uttered this verse, which is a whole nother session. Where water, earth, fire, and wind have no hold, where stars do not shine and the sun has no radiance, where the moon does not glow and darkness cannot be found. When one personally knows this, a sage, a holy person of true wisdom, then from form, formlessness, pleasure, and pain, they are freed.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
And then this document will be attached to the YouTube video, and you can follow the links to other resources. And then I also put the complete response to the teachings from Putta in there, so you can look at that later. I'll turn the screen share off. Any final comment before we open it up? And what we'll do is we'll open it up for questions and comments specifically to. There's an arrow on the screen. Yeah. The mouse cursor was pointing right at identity, Ayyā Suvijjānā.
And
So I
then
moved
my
it.
identity said, no, an arrow can't be on my image.
Yeah, that was the first start, and then the second dart. Anyway, so we'll open it up if Ayya's got any wrap up to questions and comments specifically about this sutta. And then we'll turn the recording off and we can stay on for anything that's more personal or, that you want to talk about around the sutta that's not for posterity's sake. So anything you want to wrap up with, or sadhu sadhu is our wrap?
Yeah, I think Bāhiya was known as the most quick to attain. He's in the listing of the arahants, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
The fastest to attain arahantship, to final liberation. And there was also the idea that he had been practicing in former lives. So it's don't worry if you're applying yourself in this life well, maybe in some other lifetime. So if we think in terms of multiple lifetimes, then we don't have to despair that, oh my goodness, I have so much work to do and so on. But keep on. There's this is where the balance between Putta and Bāhiya is really important to consider. That just because we don't get the teaching immediately, just keep keep at it. We get deeper and deeper in understanding, especially if we're working with the teachings,
Yeah,
applying ourselves to the teachings. So that's,
thank you.
I wanted to say.
So electronic or physical hand, if you'd like to share or ask on recording.
John has a, Anjali.
I think-
John, can you unmute yourself?
Was that
The John with
a-
the, without an H.
did you have a question or comment or just, okay, no.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry,
All right.
misunderstood the Anjali.
Well, let's then go to the after party and we'll say, you know, wonderful to all those who are seeing the sutta later.
Should we close with that?
Sure, yeah, let's close with so that
Arahant.
is on the recording and then.
Okay. Arahant Samma Sambuddho Bhagava Buddham Bhagavantam Abhivademi Swakato Bhagavata Dhammo Dhammam Namassami Supatipanno Bhagavato Sāvaka Sangho Sangham Namami